Hey everybody, so today we're going to be going over how to repair or change a flat tire inner tube. This can commonly happen when you either ride with underinflated tires or pick up something like a nail or a sharp piece of gravel on the road. And it's not a complex job, but it does take a little bit of perseverance, as some steps can be a bit difficult and you may find you need strong fingers to get it done. This is the back tire that we're going to be changing, and I'm chosen to do this one because this one is slightly more difficult because you have to release the chain and then retension the chain properly after you reinstall. The front tire is much easier if you get a flat. If you can choose to get a flat, choose to get it in the front tire. So before we begin, we'll go over the tools that you'll need. There's not many. You'll need the 15mm wrench to remove the axle nut here. And you'll also need these 3 tire irons. You do need 3. You might be able to get away with 2, but it makes the job a lot more difficult. These are available on Amazon or Canadian Tire, wherever you get bike parts. So to start, we're going to take the 15mm wrench and remove the wheel entirely from the bike frame. If you have a bike stand or a mechanic stand, it's an easier job, but I always do my videos without the mechanic stand because I assume that most people don't have one of those handy around their house. Here we go. So remove both axle nuts. You don't have to take these entirely off of the axle, you just have to loosen them enough so that the wheel can slide backwards out of the frame. So now that they're loose and the wheel is all loose in the frame, the next step you have to keep in mind is taking the chain off of the flywheel. So removing the chain is simple enough if you do it right. What you want to do is put your thumb or any finger on the bottom of the chain and push it in towards the wheel. As you do that, you want to take your right hand and turn the pedals backwards. You'll see here it's popped off of the front sprocket. That's what you want. As you continue turning backwards, the chain will fall off on its own. Next, we move to the back and we pull this loose chain just over and hang it on the rear dropout of the frame. Now it's entirely out of the way, and this back wheel can slide out in that direction without touching the chain at all. So now we come to the back of the bike over here, and you grab the seat post of the bike and the tire with the back with your hand, and you pull backwards towards yourself out of the bike frame. So lift up from the seat post and pull backwards with your right hand, and the wheel should come out without any difficulty. Just rest the frame down nicely on the floor, don't drop it or you'll scratch it, and we'll bring this over to where we have a little bit more area to work on it. So here we are on the floor with no debris or anything around to get in the way. I've switched to an overhead shot so you can get the perception of you looking down at the wheel where you'll probably be working on it. So it's a bit tricky here. This is the step that you'll need the 3 tire levers that we mentioned earlier. To start, you take off the dust cap of your wheel because this will have to come out through that hole and this will be too wide. So taking our tire lever, we simply go in between the tire and the rim, as you can see here, and you try to carefully get it in between there, pushing it slowly. Once you feel that it's just underneath the tire, grabbing the tire when you push this way, you can pry towards the spokes very slowly in hopes that you don't further damage the inner tube or the tire, and then you'll see on your tire levers that these clips will actually grab right onto your spokes. So now you'll probably realize why you need 3 of these, because one holds it out just enough, but you can't continue on with your fingers because it's still too snug on the rim. So moving on, we go to the right of the other one and we continue just the same way as before, but with another tire lever. So the second one will actually be a bit trickier than the first one. Remember, you want to grab just the tire, just one side of the tire, and pull it over top of the rim. Once you do so, you clip it on the spokes and carry on with your third tire lever. This one will probably be the hardest one to get, but it's still doable, just be patient. So exactly the same process again, you'll just feel that the tire has gotten tighter on the rim. Sometimes you won't even have to clip it onto the spoke, it will just pop out entirely. And once you see all your tire levers get loose and pop out, it's because the tire has now loosened on top of the rim, and you should be able to continue the rest by hand. That's the hardest step of this entire process. If you can do that, you're probably in the clear. Let's carry on removing the entire tire from the rim. So here you just pull by hand, and you slowly, as you work your way around the wheel, push the tire over top of the rim. I'll pause to show you what we're doing. Now you'll see that the tire here is coming over the rim, and as we go around, it'll come over the rim all the way as we continue turning the wheel. Alright, so we've gone all the way around, and you can see the entire tire is on top of the rim, meaning it is coming out from the rim itself, as you can see here. The next side is fairly easy to take off. You just push it, the whole tire, off of the rim with both thumbs. And it should be pretty loose, so you can just push it. Alright, so this is the step where we separate the inner tube from the tire. If you have a flat for some reason and you think the reason is because you ran over some sort of sharp object, this is the point that you'd want to check for where that sharp object is in a tire, so that when you put your new inner tube, you don't immediately puncture that one as well. So a lot of times what you'll do is you'll look around the tire, and in these inner tubes they use a bit of a white powder. So wherever the hole is in the inner tube, the white powder will come out and leave an impression on your tire. As you pull this out, you'll be able to see the white impression wherever the hole is. So you want to leave your inner tube just in the same place, but outside of the tire. Then you go around and simply inspect for where your white powder is. Where you find the white powder is where there's likely some sort of intrusion through the tire or some sort of sharp object still in there. So what you want to do is just go around and clean out the inside of the tire thoroughly. This one doesn't have any white powder because it wasn't actually punctured, it was just caused by underinflation during riding. So next step, we want to get rid of this inner tube. You can repair these, but you can usually find them pretty cheap on Amazon or Canadian Tire. So I usually won't bother unless it's a very special inner tube like a latex or a lightweight one. Okay, I pulled out a new inner tube. And the way you find the size of this is by looking on the side of your tire. On the side of the tire, there'll usually be some sort of dimensions, something in the likes of 700 by something, or 700 by 23, 700 by 28. And what this means is that the overall diameter of your tire is 700 millimeters, and the width of your tire is resembled by the second number. In this case, it would be a 23, meaning that the tire is 23 millimeters in width. So when you buy your inner tube, you want to make sure that it has the right measurements to match the tire that you're putting it in. Here we have a 700 by 23 inner tube. Next, you have to keep in mind the valve stem length. So on ours, we have a sort of aerodynamic rim. And when you have an aerodynamic rim, you need to take that into account and buy a longer valve stem. So what we can use on ours is a 60 millimeter valve stem or a 48 millimeter valve stem. If you use anything shorter, it won't reach through the aerodynamic portion of the rim and you won't be able to inflate that tire. So don't make that mistake. So what I find helps here is just slightly inflating the tire, the inner tube, very little before we put it in. It just makes it a little bit more manageable. So we're not doing too much inflating there, as you can see. This is very little, probably less than 1 psi. It's just so that we can manage the inner tube and get it to stay in the tire while we do the work. So now we lay the inner tube inside the tire the same way we took it out. And because it's slightly inflated, it'll just stay in place for us while we position everything else. Here is the rim that we pulled away before. So we want to put this just below the tire like this. And you want to keep in mind where your hole is for the valve stem. In this rim, the valve stem hole is here. So we line up the valve stem with the valve stem hole in the rim. Push it through the valve stem hole, but not all the way, just loose, just so it stays in the place where it should be. Moving forward, we're going to do one side of this tire at a time. You won't be able to do both sides in one shot. So I usually start with the side facing the floor, and we go around and put the tire back inside the rim. The first side is usually pretty easy, just as it was easy to take out. So here we are with the tire that is one side in the rim and one side out of the rim. You can probably see here. The next step will be to line up the valve stem through the hole properly. So here it is, and you just pull it through to the point where it sort of looks correct. Just sticking out enough that you can inflate the tire. I usually like to start putting the second side on right on top of the valve stem because this is the trickiest spot. So if you start doing it here, you'll find that this is actually a little bit more room to play with to get this in. So getting this on can be quite tricky, especially if it's your first time. But don't be discouraged if you've tried for 4 or 5 minutes and you can't get it right. Just continue trying and you should eventually get it. But don't be discouraged. What sometimes helps at this point is deflating the small amount of air that we put into the inner tube, because now we'll need that little bit of extra space to stretch the tire over the last bit of the rim. And there you have it. Now the tire is entirely back in the rim. So you just want to go around and make sure that it's all seated properly. As you can see here, this is one spot that is not seated correctly. And that means you can see that little hook, or the little hook part of the tire that grabs into the rim. You want to make sure that you don't see that. So when you do, you just want to push it down and it'll pop into place where it's supposed to be, just in the rim to hold the tire onto it. After you've inspected the entire tire, what I usually do is inflate it to about 1/3 or half the recommended pressure on the tire. So this one is 90, so what we want to do is inflate it to around 40. So here it's inflated right around 40 psi. So what you want to do is just bounce it a little bit and turn it to see if it's seated correctly all the way around. If it's not seated correctly, what will happen is you'll see the tire slowly pushing out in one spot on the rim. Check both sides, of course. And after you've checked both sides and it looks like it's all seated correctly, you can continue inflating the tire back up to the recommended PSI. On this one, once again, it is 90. Now it's all inflated and it's all ready to go back into the bike tire. I usually like to put the dust cap on at this point just so you don't forget to do so later. Alright, there we go. I'll go grab the bike frame and we'll be back. Okay, back at the bike frame we take our wheel that is repaired and ready to go and we insert it the same way that we pulled it out. So lift up the bike frame from the seat post. Make sure that the sprocket is on the right side, meaning that it'll line up with the chain when we put this wheel back in. This is the wrong direction. This is the correct direction. As you see, the sprocket is on the right side. Now we insert the wheel back into the frame. As we do so, we want to make sure we get this chain tensioner in the right position. So as we set this in to the dropouts of the frame, we want to make sure it goes right in between where the chain tensioner is and the hub. Sometimes it will be a bit tricky to start, but don't worry about it. So it'll slide back, and here you can see that the chain tensioner is not done correctly. It's loose. This is what you want to make sure you don't do. So you pull it back just slightly, seat this chain tensioner on the back of the dropout, and then pull the wheel forward slightly. So now it's sitting as it was before we started doing the repair. From here, I usually like to put the chain back on at this point because I find it a little bit easier than if we tension up these rear hub nuts and then try to put the chain on. Either way is acceptable, it's just this way is a little bit easier. So this comes off in much of the same way it went on. We put the chain over top of the back sprocket and line it up. Now that is on correctly, and we just need to put it onto the front. So I usually start on the bottom here. I line up the bottom of the chain with the sprocket first, and then I slowly turn the pedals backwards. As you turn the pedals backwards, you'll see that the last step, it doesn't really want to go. It could be caught on the inside of the sprocket here. Now, if that happens, what you want to do is just loosen the chain by turning the other way, taking it off and trying again. So make sure that this back of the chain clears the sprocket as it comes around, and then continue turning backwards. Now you'll see the chain is back on correctly. Coming to the back, grab your 15mm wrench, and we're going to retighten the rear axle nuts. With your left hand, hold the wheel in the center of the frame, and at this point you might want to do your retensioning process for the chain. I have another video that shows you how to do this properly. It's basically just using a 10mm wrench on the back here and tightening up the chain tension. Usually you won't have to do so, but sometimes you'll find that you do when you change anything to do with the rear wheel. So if the chain tension feels about right, what you want to do is retighten these axle nuts. Take your 15mm wrench and turn clockwise on either side. Do the same thing on the opposite side, all while holding the wheel in the center of the frame with the hand that you're not using on the tool. There you have it. So both sides are tightened up. Just double check to make sure that they don't come loose, and lift up the bike and give it a spin. Make sure everything works okay. When you ride the first time, just go around the block, short trip, remain seated on the seat, and see if the tire goes back down. If the wheel goes back down, what's happened is that the sharp object that damaged your first inner tube is still in there, and it's damaged your new inner tube now as well. It's not an ideal situation, and that's why we check for debris or anything that's in there while we're looking in the tire. But sometimes you'll have it that things go that way. So as usual, this repair was done on one of our 53 single speed bikes from Butter Bikes. This video pertains exactly to our bike, but will also be useful for other bikes, as this process is pretty much standard throughout most standard bike tires, as long as they do have an inner tube in them. That's all for today. I'll come back next week with another maintenance video. It's always great to know how to work on your own bikes, because this job would probably run on average around $40 at most Toronto bike shops. So if you can do it yourself in half an hour, you can save yourself quite a bit of money, not to mention time traveling to the bike shop.